So thanks everybody for coming. It's great to have you here. This is, I guess, the fourth sort of tech field day event and the third storage field day that we've done. So it's been pretty exciting to have this group come through Coho like once a year and to give you an update. It sort of feels like this is the time of the year where I get to reflect on the year and try and put together a bit of stuff about what we've been doing. And so as I've done previous years, I'm going to divide the presentation today into 4 parts. The first part is the part where, according to Stephen's rules, I'm allowed to unashamedly promote the product in marketing terms, and you cannot throw any objects at me. And in the remaining 3 parts, I will.
Only through things.
In the remaining 3 parts, I will not do that. I will go into the weeds a little bit on some of the stuff that we've been working on. I've actually structured the remaining 3 parts to be somewhat overlapping with the sort of like 3 parts that I did at the end of last year's, so that hopefully we can talk through some of the stuff that happened over the year and then some of the next steps on these things, because it ended up being a reasonable division of sort of stuff we work on. The other thing that I think I want to be cautious to and I want to mention up front is last year I got a little bit carried away, possibly with using the whiteboard and going into the weeds, and there were some comments after the presentation that it was really cool, but it was difficult to write blog posts on because it was somewhat dense. And so if at any point this is too dense, you should just call stop or tap the floor or something like that, and I'll try and bring it to more interesting terms, because I want this to be valuable for you guys in terms of what we talk about. So let's see if we can go that way. Okay, so let me start with what we sell. Coho sells what I'm going to call, right, it's a storage product, as are all the people that you'll hear from over the next few days, but I'm going to call it a data platform, right, and it's a rack scale data platform. So for all of the conversations that we've heard in recent years around things like hyperconvergence, right, and challenging the traditional sort of siloing between storage, network, and compute in the data center, right, I think that Coho's place is in a rack converged sort of way of thinking about building the data center, right? So our product combines storage and network switching, right? We ship an SDN switch as part of the product, and a lot of what we try to do there is to expose the capabilities of high performance flash and build something that scales out seamlessly as a data platform inside an enterprise environment. And so the way that this typically deploys is as a small number of our boxes, because they're both capacity and performance dense in a rack, and then as a customer grows over time, right, it grows out, allowing them to scale compute and storage independently, right? And this is kind of an interesting learning for us this year, in that we were working with a lot of different customer environments, and I think around this point, right, we're in our 4th year as a startup, you start to find the things that are really working, right, and a lot of stuff changes. So I'm hoping to give you some sort of experiences in today's discussion around stuff we've learned, right, and places where things are working, and maybe places that we don't want to spend as much effort working on. And so this notion of private clouds is actually the focus of this first segment of the talk. And I think that this is a very underappreciated term from an operational perspective, what this means, right? I think a lot of people, when they hear private cloud, they kind of define it as not the public cloud, right? It's all the IT that isn't in AWS, right? And this is not exactly what I mean. In a lot of the customer environments that Coho is successfully selling into, right, they are investing in a demand-structured IT environment inside what is otherwise a very traditional IT environment. Right, so the folks that we talk to often have a whole bunch of legacy stuff. It may be physical servers, it may even be VMware, right? But they're building a sort of new cloud environment inside the enterprise that is demand provisioned, right? That is sort of measured on its operational cost per month and the time to provisioning, right? For customers being able to spin up resources on it. And so I'll go into some more detail on this, but this is kind of how this works. The other thing that I'll emphasize here, and I'm going to come back to this later in the talk, is that unlike a lot of traditional storage systems, right, we're not building the system in a rack at the end of the row, right? And that's very intentional in this design, right? One of the biggest challenges that I think these systems face, and I'll go into this more, is locality, right? And being able to expose these really, really impressive storage devices to the compute that's using it. And so with Coho, you should be able to scale your storage as you need it, scale your compute as you need it, and make sure that the traffic going from the compute to the storage goes as efficiently as possible, right? And doesn't tax the east-west traffic through the network. Make sense? All right, so now I'm gonna tell you about a whole bunch of stuff that we've really heard all the time. To me, I mean, I've been building system software and infrastructure software for quite a while at this point, and I think like this time, right, this year especially is probably one of the most exciting and most terrifying from the perspective of an IT director or CIO or architect, right, that there has ever been. Right? There's so much stuff that is uncertain for these environments that it's really difficult to figure out how to make decisions. So let me walk through a few of them. First of all, right, over the past few years, commodity hardware has really displaced traditional co-designed hardware and software and products. And so commodity hardware is getting faster and cheaper, faster than you can build your own ASICs, right, or build your own systems. And so we're seeing immense wins from companies that take advantage of this. Now, packaging is totally separate from commodity hardware, right? You don't need to be software defined, right, to ship software to take advantage of commodity hardware. Many of the existing storage and infrastructure vendors like Coho build on top of commodity hardware, right? We change vendors for the flash and for the servers that we use over time. And we're still able to take advantage of these economics and pass them on to the customer, right? There are a few cases in larger environments where we do ship and sell on software because in those customers, right, they get better margins on the volume of hardware that they buy than we do. So this is an attractive aspect. But this is sort of a change, right? It's a different thing to think about, and it's something that people are really coming to terms with, right? Even when we started, the idea that we were building and selling on top of white box servers was quite sort of problematic in some traditional IT environments. Whereas today, suddenly we're getting those same environments telling us they want to buy those servers, right, and sell software or buy software on top of it. Here's another one, and I talk about this every year, and I'll go into it in more detail again. But there's all sorts of new storage media. Right? If you look even 5 or 10 years ago at the stuff that you could go and buy to build a storage target, you were looking at spinning disks, maybe some very early and unreliable and very like sort of unpredictable flash, and non-volatile RAM. And the non-volatile RAM was usually a custom part that you had built for your target. And so that led you to building a storage target that at least 10 years ago didn't use a lot of flash or any flash, right? Maybe used it as a cache that took all of its writes into a proportionately very small non-volatile write buffer, and then tried to figure out how to do stuff with disks, right? Over the past few years, we moved from SSDs being viable, right, and the birth of a bunch of SSD companies, to SSDs being enterprise, right, to being able to buy PCIe devices that were guaranteed for 5 device rewrites a day for 5 years, right, or more, right, to now something in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 different types of storage that you can viably build inside a product, right? So this is becoming incredibly complicated. And from a strictly economic perspective, right, these things are falling in price faster than the ownership cycle of most hardware that you buy, right? So if you're buying something for 3 to 5 years, right, halfway through that, right, the unused space has lost half of its value, right? It's a really spectacular change. Vendors are changing as fast as media is changing, right? So there's all of these great new companies that you guys are going to hear from over the next couple of days. And even the existing old guard companies that you would trust and go to are suddenly, you know, with things like the Dell EMC announcement last week, right, with the entrance of AWS and stuff, and I think I have a separate bullet on that, right, kind of, you know, changing in their composition. You don't know how to trust product lines that have existed for a long time, and there's new viable things coming in. So there's interesting stuff here. There's the public versus private cloud debate, right? Is it all going to move, right? This one especially comes in the case of public cloud vendors marketing very heavily to CIOs who are demanding that their teams go and move stuff wholesale to public clouds, right? And then there's realities that make that difficult. And so this is a point of change. And then finally, for the first time, right, in, you know, whatever, 30 years of computing, there are actually new applications, right? For all of the time that we were working with virtualization, right, it was the same stuff, right? It was like 5 apps, Exchange and SQL Server and Oracle and stuff like that. But suddenly, in the customers that we're talking to, there are application development teams that are doing tightly integrated development cycles, pushing dashboards, data analytics and stuff into the data center, right? So the arrival and churn of new applications right now is significantly different than we've seen in the past, right? IT is becoming actually a service for hosting these things.
So by that, are you talking about the so-called cloud-native applications with, application layer resiliency and that kind of thing, or?
I wouldn't even go, so yes, I'd lump those in there, but I wouldn't even go that far. I think finally we're seeing enough orchestration, even when it's on top of VMs, for people to be able to push apps in, push server apps, right?
You're seeing a different I/O profile?
Yes. And a different I/O churn, right? Just the rate of full system install and refresh, right? With VDI, we saw it a little bit, but VDI, kind of solved it right away by templating, right, and snapping and just refreshing a gold master. Whereas suddenly you're seeing development cycles that are pushing new code out, right, all the time on these things.
Even if that's still using an ACID SQL database in the back end.
Exactly. So let me tell you about the customer where we sort of, seem to be having a bunch of success. I would say that it is a private cloud environment. And I want to define this pretty carefully, right? It is typically a medium to large size company. And I would even describe this as being a service provider model for IT. So for as long as I've talked to IT guys, they have described to me what they do as being a service provider for their organization, right? It's like a common characterization thing. They have this nasty job of having to manage a CapEx style product acquisition into an OpEx style accounting inside their organization, right? It's pretty straightforward. Now the weird thing is, that's how enterprise IT guys have thought about stuff, but then there are these guys that are actually service providers, right? And so in the service provider situation, right, that is absolutely true. In fact, there is no surrounding business justification for what you do other than efficiently turning the hardware you buy into stuff that you charge out per month. Right? And so as we started to talk to service providers, one thing that we immediately noticed is that they're incredibly risk averse on CapEx. And so the reason that they absolutely struggle with the purchase of big traditional storage is if you have a sort of, let's say 5-year service useful life on a piece of hardware, right? And you're gonna do a spend here, right? That's gonna be what you spend to own that thing for 5 years. And your consumption of that is kind of going like this, right? In the service provider case, this is terrifying in 2 ways, right? First of all, you don't have this money right now. And second of all, you have no idea what this line looks like, right? And so it's really, really daunting. And so one of the most...
As opposed to the corporate guy who says, I'm going to buy that VMAX, I'm going to buy it fully populated on day one because I don't want I don't want the work of upgrading it.
Yes, true. And where the budget decision has been made, right? Where the company is used to that sort of model. And so let me come back to that point, Howard, because it's, I think, a really important one. The reason scale-out is a win, right, today, especially on Flash, is nothing to do with all of the traditional scale-out arguments. It is this, right? The thing that we can do is we, as a scale-out storage company, can sell to here, right? And they can own to here, and then they can make a decision. And then they can grow, right? And so on. And if they end up having a flat period, it's okay. And if they end up having a high growth period, it's okay, right? So scale out is an incredible response to risk, right? To change in these environments. Yeah, Enrico.
So in the first slide, you mentioned that now you see Coho in multiple racks. So it's a kind of different scale out model than you showed out in the past storage field days. So something changes also in the architecture. So in the way you deploy all
so today, most of our deployments are frequently single rack initially, but there is an ask from those deployments to be able to do exactly that. Right?
Okay.
There are a few deployments that are in that model, and that notion of topology is something that we're doing a ton of work on in product.
So it's more a customer need than
yes,
actually.
Absolutely. And so hopefully this makes sense. And so the way that I think that this is really reflected on the enterprise side is to the service provider, to the real sort of actual service providing company, this was an obvious need, right? And an obvious fit. To the enterprise guy, right, the thing that is changing this is that sort of traditional budget is being actively challenged by cloud providers, right? Because their CIO is going, actually, could we do this on a monthly or quarterly sort of assessment? Right, that's the most attractive thing, but there are a ton of reasons for them to have local, right, IT. Those reasons span from the fact that they have a core competence around it, that it's actually cheaper at anything over a medium scale for them to do that in a lot of environments, especially if they have colo or data center build out, right? And then there's all sorts of reasons around, regulatory stuff and security and so on. And so this is not a public versus private thing. It is just saying the private cloud is not dead, right? The private cloud is valid, and this is a good fit. And in particular, the place where we're really seeming to resonate with the private cloud guys is that we can allow them to have a pricing story and an ownership story that is very, very similar to what they're seeing in a public storage service. Right, that we can allow them to procure and plan storage that way, that the sort of operational proposition of what we build at Coho has no like zoning or aggregate configuration or the traditional storage stuff around dealing with, you know, all of this sort of like hardware level management, because we're trying to build something that competes with an AWS style storage offering, right? And so this is an interesting thing. And so,
and you wouldn't just say a lot of the startup vendors are in the same sort of scenario?
I think this is absolutely what a lot of the startup vendors are chasing.
Some of them aren't, but you know, a vast majority of them are
yes,
scale-out.
I would say a bunch of especially the newer ones, right? So some of the very successful startups are very successfully chasing an incredibly legacy use case, which is physical servers on Fibre Channel, which is a big market, and there's lots of stuff there. It's not scale up, right? It's not really achieving that.
You know, and frankly, some of those guys came out of the blocks faster because it looked more like a Clarion and was more accessible to the to the customers.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's actually that thing, right? The sort of change in appetite and the change in what qualifies as a useful storage offering has really quickly changed on the enterprise side over the last couple of years, right? And that's a thing that we're seeing. So now I'm going to tell you a slight twist on that story that is like kind of the fuller picture of where we resonate, right? Like, so this sort of cost and ownership proposition is absolutely, you know, bread and butter for the Coho story. But there's a thing that's really interesting, that's a little bit broader, and I think that this is kind of a neat way to think about where we're coming from and where we're heading. So, you know, this is the original Coho idea, right? Our customers, Coho's customers, have a run rate requirement and budget for storage. And they buy that storage from companies that I have an enormous amount of respect for because they've been building incredible storage for years. Right? Except that these companies sell hardware and force the customers to manage hardware as hardware. And the customers are being asked to get storage that looks and prices and behaves more like this. Right? And so the sort of idea behind what we decided to build was that we would go and chase that. Right? So this was the sort of storage pitch. As we started to go out and be successful in those like medium and large environments, right, these more sophisticated IT shops, we kept hearing the same thing. We kept hearing that not only were they trying to move from a CapEx to an OpEx style storage system, but they were being asked to do all these things that weren't traditionally being asked for in their environments. They were being asked to support data analytics projects. They're being asked to support application services, things like log analysis applications and stuff. And they're being asked more and more to tightly host corporate application development on the hardware. And so there are all these new cool things, right? And the reality of this is, from the IT team's perspective, right, this old stuff is boring and it has budget. And this is a really, really important thing. And this new stuff,
too many of the yuggins forget that last part.
Exactly. And this
well, actually, they forget the middle part too. The necessary.
This new stuff is really, really exciting, but it's an aspirational thing. It's new. It doesn't have budget behind it. It doesn't even necessarily have experience behind it. And this is the place where I see us focusing and winning. Right? And so if I can, this is going to be the pinnacle of my marketing, right, for describing the product. This line, right, storage transformation without disruption for the modern enterprise, right? So this is like actually like a pretty useful way of thinking about what we do. We want to allow our customers to change from this to this, right, and start to take on some of this. And I don't want to be a disruptive startup, right? That's exactly the opposite of what our customers want. Right?
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And
worship of disruption in this town makes me nuts.
And the customer that we work with the best is a sophisticated one, right? I would say this is this sort of like idea of the modern enterprise, right? The enterprise customer that isn't really thinking that this is a public versus private decision, right? That isn't really pigeonholing anything, right? They want to be able to take advantage of the benefits of the public cloud because there's great low cost, you know, cold capacity storage there, and we should be accommodating that, right? They want to take advantage of it to burst compute for big data, but they also have some form of colo or on-premises requirement, and that's the place where we, you know, are focused. And so hopefully that makes sense. So now I'm going to tell you everything that happened since last year in one slide, and then you can like head off early to your next thing.
4-point type.
Yeah. So let me tell you some of the stuff that happened. And again, I'm going to try and emphasize some experiences. So I think you're going to see the tone change a little bit in terms of how I talked about the product and the company as a younger company than the one we are today. So we shipped an AFA. We did this earlier this year. The AFA box that we ship is still a hybrid box effectively. It's still tiered storage. So we still use a set of 4 NVMe flash devices at the top, and then a backing tier of 1, 2, or 4 terabyte SSDs. So fully populated, this box is 50 usable terabytes, no data reduction, right? In 2U. It does compression, and it automatically tiers data between the high performance flash and the low performance flash. The reason to mix the 2 types of flash is that we don't have to have, the NVMe is fast enough to avoid having an NVRAM write buffer, which means that we can burst writes out to the capacity of the full NVMe flash, and that we can read off of both. We can also take advantage of the much higher durability on the NVMe to stage writes until they become warm and push them down onto the less, like more standard enterprise backing flash.
Okay. The 50 terabytes usable is before compression?
That's before compression.
Okay.
Yeah.
Compression counts as data reduction, by the way.
Yes, that's why I didn't include it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 50 terabytes usable, not counting compression.
Right. You said no data reduction. And
yes, so I meant the number is without data reduction.
Oh, okay.
Right? So if you add the compression, right, that number increases. And we still haven't done dedupe. And we will. I would argue that we do absolutely all of the high stakes aspects of dedupe and the things that everybody else counts as part of dedupe. So we do thin provisioning, thin clones, right, space efficient clones, and zero elimination in the storage, right? The only thing that is not currently implemented is content scanning deduplication, which is something that will come for us in the next year.
So you do duplicate avoidance.
Yes, yes. And I can point you at pretty significant studies that suggest that's where all of the real value is for most environments, if you want to. This is a research backgrounded thing, and I'll just assert it, and you can chase me down if you want to see the paper.
Oh, I will.
So, anyways, we also added support for Openstack and XenServer in the last year, right? So we built a Cinder driver that's in the process of going upstream. We're moving into our first service provider customer that's actually using XenServer, which was an exciting thing for us because we wrote the XenServer side of these storage interfaces. So that's sort of fun. We're going through the XenServer cert process as well. We added a pile of super boring enterprise features. Right, so as we started to work with these larger customers, they asked for all sorts of stuff that
synchronous replication
weren't very exciting to implement. So the synchronous stuff is actually we haven't added that, but that's one that is going to be very natural for us. No, I mean stuff like SNMP MIBs, Active Directory integration, syslog support, right? All of this fit and finish stuff that you just need to survive, right? One of the experiences that we've had over the year, and this goes into my next point, is that in many of the customer environments that we're dealing with, our stuff is being evaluated by storage teams that are about half the size or more of the engineering team at Coho. Right? They're just massive teams, right? They have run rate spend on storage that far exceeds, what we spend as a company. Right? And so
let them know that.
It's a long process to get through. But we did also still manage to do a few pretty cool things. So we integrated Docker into the storage platform, right? So we have extended the storage platform to allow compute to be pushed in and function adjacent to data. And I'm going to spend the end of today talking about that, so I'll come back to it. The other one that's pretty cool is with UBS and Intel, we built a 23-node all-flash cluster. We implemented the HDFS protocol for it, and we allowed big data jobs, multi-tenant big data jobs, to be spun up and run within the storage system. So you can provision and stand up an 8 or 16 node Spark cluster and run it directly within the NFS target. You can access the data over NFS or HDFS. You are not limited to a single homogeneous Cloudera or Hortonworks install. The multi-tenancy means that you can install whatever distro you want and manage it separately, which is actually a really useful thing for a lot of these environments. And so I'll spend the last bit of today talking about that. And so this has actually been published as a pair of papers from Intel, co-authored with UBS. It's pretty interesting work. Okay, so the rest of today, how am I doing for time? Hopefully I haven't blown past it in my first.
Fine.
All right. So I'm going to start. I always think about this when I get on the plane to fly home after doing these talks, that there's this like silly like personality thing around the way that these are presented, and I don't want to be that guy, right? All of the stuff that we do is our engineering team's work, right? It's the product team's work. It's largely also the support team's work, because the support team, sits downstairs from the engineering team next to the kitchen, and whenever anything goes desperately wrong, they run upstairs and beat people up, and new features come out of that a lot. And so, at Coho, these are the guys that do all the really good stuff.
Lifting.
And I just get to talk about it once a year. And so, they're the ones that really deserve the credit for everything that I talk about. So I'm going to break the rest of today up into 3 sections. First, I'm going to talk about why it's hard to build stores with diamonds. That might seem intuitive, but hopefully we'll all learn something. Then I'm going to talk about a bit of numerology around workloads and some of the progress that we've made in understanding them and adapting to them. And then finally, I'm going to tell you this stuff that we've done with Docker initially and how it's rolling into the product release that's about to come out. And I'll show you a few demos along the way. As I said at the beginning, interrupt as much as you can. I'll tell you if you're doing it too much.
You mentioned Active Directory integration a minute ago, actually,
Yes.
and the fact that you're looking at the service provider market as well.
Yeah.
Is that AD integration for a single domain, or have you got plans to potentially roll out so you can support multiple domains?
It's
so
initially single domain, but it will become multiple domains. Yep. Initially, one of the other things that we put in as part of that was support for secure audit logs of everything on the system. Right? It's like it's a relatively banal but really, really important feature, right? So basically, the integration with AD right now is to create an AD group around managing the Coho gear, right? You can put whatever AD users you want into it, and then those users log in using their AD or LDAP accounts to do anything that they want, either at the REST API or the UI level on the box, and it's all audited undeletably on the platform.
Right. So it's AD integration for management as opposed to front-end access.
Initially, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.